These 4 men met their fate in the execution chamber. Their crimes were brutal. Let's uncover what really happened when the clock ran out, what were their last meals, and their last words. The first one to be executed was Stephen Nelson on February 5, 2025 in Texas. Stephen LaWayne Nelson, born February 18, 1987, was a murderer sentenced to death for the 2011 killing of Pastor Clinton Dobson in Arlington, Texas. On March 3, 2011, Nelson stormed into North Point Baptist Church, attacking Dobson and Church Secretary Judy Elliott during a robbery. Dobson was beaten and suffocated with a garbage bag, while Elliott was left severely injured but survived. Nelson stole their belongings, later using Elliott's credit cards for personal purchases. A police investigation linked Nelson to the crime through forensic evidence, including bloodstains on his shoes and fingerprints at the scene. He was arrested after failing to report to his probation officer. Despite his claims that 2 friends committed the murder while he acted as a lookout, the jury found him guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to death on October 16, 2012. Nelson had a long history of violent crime, beginning in childhood with burglaries, assaults, and property offenses. He spent years in juvenile detention and later faced multiple arrests for theft, assault, and probation violations. While awaiting trial for Dobson's murder, he was accused of killing fellow inmate Jonathan Holden by strangulation. Nelson's appeals were repeatedly denied, and his execution date was set for February 5, 2025. His case has sparked debate among Christian leaders and death penalty opponents, though many, including Dobson's church members, supported his execution. Stephen LaWayne Nelson, 37, was executed by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m. at the state penitentiary in Huntsville. Just before the injection was administered, Nelson repeatedly expressed his love and gratitude to his wife, who observed through a window nearby. "It is what it is," he remarked, and urged her to enjoy life. She responded by holding up a white service dog, which she was permitted to bring into the witness area. "I'm not scared, I'm at peace," Nelson said. "Let's ride, Warden." As the lethal dose of pentobarbital began, he told his wife, Helen Noah Dubois, whom he married while incarcerated, "Let me go to sleep." After the drug took effect, he uttered the word love, then gasped twice and appeared to try to hold his breath. His head, shoulders, and arms trembled briefly before all movement ceased. He was officially declared dead 24 minutes later. Texas does not offer special last meal requests anymore. Nelson simply had to choose something to eat from a menu that all other inmates had for that day. Just 1 day later, the second man executed was Demetrius Fraser, February 6, 2025, in Alabama. Demetrius Terrence Fraser was a serial rapist and convicted murderer on death row in Alabama for the 1991 rape and murder of Pauline Brown, a 40-year-old woman he killed during a robbery. He was also convicted in Michigan for the 1992 murder of 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick, whom he shot while attempting to assault her. In addition to these murders, Fraser was accused of raping 8 women in Michigan, with a jury convicting him of 2 assaults. Arrested in Detroit for Kendrick's murder, he later confessed himself to killing Brown. Fraser received 2 life sentences in Michigan in 1993 for Kendrick's murder and other crimes. In 1996, Alabama sentenced him to death for Brown's murder. He spent 18 years in Michigan's Alger Correctional Facility before being transferred to Alabama's Holman Correctional Facility in 2011. Scheduled for execution by nitrogen hypoxia on February 6, 2025, Fraser attempted legal appeals, arguing that the method was inhumane. A federal judge denied his request to halt the execution. His mother also pleaded for his transfer back to Michigan, but her request was denied as well. Demetrius Fraser, 52, was pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m. at a South Alabama prison, and the method of execution was nitrogen hypoxia. His last words were, "First of all, I want to apologize to the family and friends of Pauline Brown. What happened to Pauline Brown should have never happened. I love everybody on death row. Detroit strong." In his final words, Fraser also criticized Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer for not intervening after appeals for him to be returned to serve out a previous life sentence in Michigan. Strapped to a gurney with a blue-rimmed gas mask covering his face, the execution began around 6:10 p.m. following a final check of the mask by a corrections officer. For the first minute or two, Fraser moved his outstretched palms in a circular motion. At 6:12 p.m., he stopped moving his hands, appeared to grimace, and took a gasping breath. A minute later, he lifted both legs a few inches off the gurney before lowering them. His breathing slowed to irregular breaths by 6:14 p.m., and by 6:21 p.m. there was no visible movement. The curtains to the execution chamber were closed at 6:29 p.m. Alabama Corrections Commissioner John Hamm later stated that the gas flowed for approximately 18 minutes and instruments showed Fraser had no heartbeat 13 minutes after the gas started. Hamm believed Fraser lost consciousness quickly and that the subsequent movements, including raising his legs and sporadic breaths, were involuntary. In the hours leading up to his execution, Fraser spent time with his mother, sister, and legal team. For his final meal, he chose Taco Bell, which included burritos and a Mountain Dew. Real quick, before we continue, please subscribe to the channel. It will help me a lot since this will become my main source of income starting April. We've got 19 cats, 2 dogs, 2 hedgehogs, and a bunny that need food. I appreciate you all. Thank you for being here. Let's move on. The third person executed was James Ford on February 13, 2025 in Florida. James Dennis Ford was a convicted murderer and death row inmate in Florida, sentenced for the 1997 double murder of Gregory and Kimberly Malnery in Charlotte County, Florida. On April 6, 1997, Ford, Greg's co-worker, lured the Malnerys to a sod farm under the pretense of a fishing trip. Once there, he shot Greg in the head, slashed his throat, and bludgeoned him. Kimberly attempted to secure their 22-month-old daughter Miranda in the truck before Ford overtook, raped, and brutally killed her. He abandoned the child, who was later found alive but dehydrated and covered in insect bites after 18 hours alone. Ford was arrested on April 17, 1997, and convicted on March 8, 1999, of 2 counts of first-degree murder, child abuse, and sexual battery. Despite his defense arguing diminished responsibility due to drug and alcohol use, a jury recommended the death penalty by an 11-1 vote. He was sentenced to death on June 3, 1999, alongside additional prison terms for the sexual battery and child abuse charges. Over the years, Ford's appeals were repeatedly denied, including by the Florida Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court. On January 10, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed his execution warrant, and Ford was scheduled to be executed on February 13. Ford, 64, was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison in Rayford and was pronounced dead at 6:19 p.m. This marked the first execution in Florida in 2025 and the 4th in the U.S. this year. His execution took place less than an hour before Texas was scheduled to execute Richard Lee Tabler at 7 p.m. for the 2004 double murder of 2 men. Officials reported that Ford did not speak any final words to those present at the execution, but did leave a written statement. His statement read, "Hugs, prayers, love. God bless everyone." For his last meal, Ford had steak, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, sweet potato, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. 3 family members visited him on Thursday morning. As the injection began, Ford's chest began to heave, and then all movement gradually stopped. A few minutes later, a staff member shook him and shouted, "Ford, Ford." This was to check if he was still conscious, but there was no response. Moving over to Texas, in the same day, Richard Tabler was executed. He was born on February 5, 1979, and he was a spree killer convicted of 4 murders in Killeen, Texas in 2004. On November 26, Tabler and accomplice Timothy Doan Payne killed nightclub manager Mohammed Amin Rahmouni and his associate Haitham Frank Zayed over a dispute. 2 days later, Tabler murdered 2 teenage dancers from the same club, Amanda Benefield and Tiffany Dodson, fearing they knew about the prior killings. Tabler was sentenced to death for the first 2 murders, while Payne received life in prison. Tabler had a troubled upbringing marked by parental neglect, academic struggles, and an ADHD diagnosis. He had prior convictions for burglary, assault, and escape attempts. After his arrest for the 2004 killings, he initially confessed but later retracted it. His appeals spanned nearly 2 decades, with multiple attempts to waive them, though courts questioned his mental competence. His final appeal was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court on October 7, 2024. While incarcerated, Tabler illegally obtained a cell phone, using it to threaten Texas State Senator John Whitmire, leading to a lockdown and his mother's arrest for smuggling contraband. He was sentenced to an additional 10 years for these offenses. Tabler was scheduled for execution on February 13. Texas executed 46-year-old Richard Lee Tabler with a lethal injection of pentobarbital in the presence of his mother and sister among the witnesses. He was pronounced dead at 6:38 p.m., and in his final statement, Tabler expressed regret, saying, "There is not a day that goes by that I don't regret my actions." He directly addressed the victims' families, saying, "I had no right to take your loved ones from you. I am deeply sorry." His statement continued, offering words for the victims' families, saying, "If you feel that this is what you need to get closure, I pray it helps you find that." He also expressed hope for forgiveness, saying, "I just hope that one day you find that forgiveness to forgive me for taking your loved ones from you." Tabler thanked several prison staff members by name for their compassion and support, saying, "Your love and support have allowed me the opportunity to change and become a better man and rehabilitate." He reassured his loved ones, lawyers, and supporters, saying, "This isn't the end. This is only the beginning." He then thanked God, saying, "I thank God for allowing me to seek him out and finding him, showing that this isn't about me. We are all here today because of my actions, but in the end, it comes down to God, praising him and giving honor to him. I know this will be the end of this life, but it will be the beginning of my ultimate life in heaven." As the lethal drugs began to take effect, he said, "I'm sorry," one more time before his breathing became rapid. After several breaths, all movement ceased. For the month of March, 6 death warrants are currently active, and we will probably see these inmates executed. 1 in South Carolina, 1 in Texas, 2 in Louisiana, 1 in Arizona, and 1 in Oklahoma. What's interesting is that 2 of these states have not executed anyone in years. The last execution in Louisiana happened back in 2010, and the last one in Arizona was in 2022. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.